you start looking at the bulk futures and even container futures, which another aspect is you can see the volatility. It's like, hey, we're predicting the end of the quarter to be like this. Like, man, all it takes is one thing and it throws it off.
Welcome to The Derivative by RCM Alternatives. Send it.
Hi, I'm Sal Mercogliano. We're here to talk about the Edmund Fitzgerald and shipping on The Derivative.
Sal, thanks for coming on. How are you?
Thanks for having me on. I'm good. There's a lot of ship going on around the world.
Campbell University, Maritime College. I love the background here. Tell us quickly, where's Campbell?
Sure. So Campbell is in North Carolina, so about halfway between Raleigh and Fayetteville, North Carolina. I've been a professor here for 15 years. I'm the chair of the Department of History, and I'm a maritime historian. So back in a former career, went to Maritime College, New York Maritime College, and I sailed as a merchant mariner for about 7 years till I swallowed the anchor.
That's what they say when you retire, swallowed the anchor.
That's it. I didn't retire. I kind of transitioned out of shipping. I came down with a condition that precluded me from continuing my sailing career. I got married.
What were those trips like? Tell us a little bit about that life. You're gone
it was great.
Months at a time.
I love sailing. It was one of my favorite jobs in the world. As a kid growing up in New York, I wanted to get out and go see places. I used to see the ships coming in and out of the channel, Ambrose Channel into New York Harbor, and to me that was my opportunity to see the world, and I did. I loved it. It was a great job. It was a very lonely job at the time, and one of the big problems with being a mariner is you're away from home for huge periods of time. A little bit better today with some technology that allows you to be a little bit more connected, but still, it's a very tough and very quiet life. Big problem today that ships don't spend much time at all in port. So shore leave is not a big thing. You make money by moving the ships, not by sitting in port.
And what kind of ships were you on?
I sailed for actually the U.S. Navy for an outfit called Military Sea Lift Command. So I operated a lot of ships for the U.S. Navy. So some underway replenishment vessels. I was on some cargo ships, the hospital ship Comfort during the Persian Gulf War. And then I worked for Military Sea Lift Command chartering vessels. And so I worked on a batch of afloat prepositioning ships for the Army and the Marine Corps. So I got a chance to work on the private sector, working with those ships that we leased and chartered, and then working for government-owned ships.
Do those become Navy part of the fleet when they become chartered, or they're still public?
No, they're owned by the government, but what most people don't know is that about 1 out of 5 ships in the U.S. Navy have civilian crews on board, and so they're mainly
Really?
the auxiliary vessels. And so I was part of those crews that operated them.
Even in, God forbid, if we had a war or something, what happens with that setup?
Yep, they stay civilian manned, and so civilian manning of Navy ships is not actually uncommon. We've seen it before. Sailing masters, ships that are owned by the Navy but crewed by civilians, have been around for a very long time. The Royal Navy has it with the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. It's been around since 1905.
Yeah, what was that movie? Dunkirk, where they're all going over in their private boats to rescue everybody.
Yep, and they impounded the vessels and took them over. Most of them were actually in Dunkirk. Most of them had military crews put on, but some civilians did take their vessels over.
All right, well, I'm wearing my T-shirt, my Edmund Fitzgerald, which I got from the Great Lakes Maritime Museum, I believe. It's like in Duluth or something. So 50 years ago, Edmund Fitzgerald. So I want to ask you as a historian, do you get sick of this? Are you like, this is overdone. Why does everyone only care about the Edmund Fitzgerald? Or is it fun? Like someone plugs into history every now and then?
No, I like that people get interested in it. I mean, I don't think people know about this story unless it's Gordon Lightfoot making the music, the song. But to me, it's a, I deal, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about shipping all the time. And lots of times where I see a lot of upticks in my channel is when there's a disaster or something happening. And I try to take those moments to educate people about it. And it's kind of what I did in my most recent video on the Fitzgerald. I didn't recap the Fitzgerald because there's plenty of people out there who have done that and done it very well. What I wanted to do was kind of talk about why the Great Lakes matter and what the crew, the 29 mariners, were doing on board Edmund Fitzgerald back in November of 1975, holding iron ore from Duluth heading to Toledo, Ohio, because that's a key trade route and it's essential for U.S. manufacturing to get that ore out of Minnesota over to Ohio and into the steel plants.
So did Gordon screw it up? Didn't he say they're bound for Cleveland? They're bound for Toledo?
Well, I don't think Toledo sounded good in the song. So, and they offloaded in several ports, so they were heading to Toledo and Cleveland. So, I mean, you have a little literary license when you're making a song. But I think the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald really resonates because again, we tend not to think that a vessel 730 something feet long can just disappear and take all the crew with them. I mean, no evidence of the crew has ever been found.
Really?
There was, and there was a ship, the Arthur Anderson, right by it at the time, and yet one ship survives, one doesn't, and I think that's the nature, and we've seen that happen recently with stories like the Ever Given in the Suez and the Dolly in Baltimore, how these ships can really captivate all of a sudden people's imaginations.
So 737 feet. And that design, what do you call the design of that ship?
She was a Seaway Laker, so she was designed to navigate all the canals in the Great Lake and get out into the St. Lawrence Seaway. So the Welland Canal, which connects Lake Erie to Ontario, it has a constraint. It has a limit to it, and so you got to be under 737. You got to be less than 75 feet wide. You have to
Mm.
be able to get through the canal to get up. And she was really never designed to go out into the Atlantic, but she was designed to carry ore up into the St. Lawrence Seaway to deposit it into areas along the seaway so that it could be loaded onto other ships to take it across the oceans.
That I used to be a sailor, did a lot of big boat sailing out in the ocean and whatnot, but then also inland lake sailing. So I think of it as a scow, right? If you're in a Midwestern lake, you have the scow, very low beam, um, or sideboard, right? Very low sideboard, wide
Freeboard.
and skinny. Yeah. So it's not ocean worthy. Was that something going on here? Right? Like the waves became ocean waves, but it wasn't really ocean worthy.
Well, I mean, the Great Lakes are always a misnamed area to
Yeah.
me because they're oceans, they're seas. I mean, they're massive. I mean, you think of a lake, and you kind of get away from what the Great Lakes truly are. She was designed for that type of sea. I mean, I don't think that
Mm.
was really the issue. I mean, everybody knew the type of seas you can get. I mean, the gales in Superior and Huron can be rough. I mean, you have that long area stretch where you can get some really good rollers built up to it. Obviously, her cargo was unique because she was carrying a unique type of steel pellets that were very heavy. So she was not fully, I mean, she was weighted down, but she wasn't fully loaded to the brim, which
Mm.
creates some problems on ships, especially bulk carriers like that, because you get the
It
free
moves.
surface effect. Yeah, the cargo can shift. And then, what we don't know, and this is the huge mystery of Edmund Fitzgerald, is she reported a list and she reported flooding, which means that she was taking water into the holds, which creates even a bigger problem because then that iron ore becomes almost like a slurry. It will shift to each side and you get instability in the vessel. So she either cracked her hull because of the waves. Did she touch bottom? Did the hatch covers pop loose? We just don't know. I mean, this is always the great mystery of
Yeah.
Edmund Fitzgerald. And we've done a lot of examinations of the wreck. And in truth, we
Yeah.
just don't know. We have conflicting reports from the NTSB and the Coast Guard on this.
What did they do that with? Their submersibles have gone down there and everything. How deep is it sitting?
It's not very deep where she's at. It's I want to think it's about just 100 feet or so.
Mm.
It's not too terribly deep. When it happened in 75, they actually brought a Navy P3 Orion anti-submarine plane out to find it. They actually used their magnetic anomaly detector, which detects large steel in the ocean. So they found her very quickly. And then in the spring, I think it was March, they actually brought, this is 1975 or 76 at this time. They really don't have ROVs, remotely operated vehicles. So they brought a submersible in and actually dived on the wreck. And so they found her. I mean, she was clearly identified. You can see the name, and everybody knew exactly what she was. And what they found was she had broken in half. The stern had flipped over, was separated from her, but not very far from her, which indicates she went down kind of together at the moment. Contents of her hull had spilled out, and there was damage to obviously the bow, where the bow implanted into the bottom. But they, some of the hatch covers, the hatch covers they had these big clamps on them. Some of the clamps had been lost. Some of the hatch covers had been blown off. But again, what we don't know is were the hatch covers lost during the storm or when the ship struck the bottom. And so it's been very hard to kind of forensically rebuild the model here because of the damage, and especially because a lot of the surveys weren't done for years afterwards.
And what was how come no one could escape? Lifeboats, whatnot, too rough, or just wasn't designed with safety in mind, like a
Well,
Titanic issue?
Well, I mean, this story is very reminiscent of a story that happened in 2015 with another American ship called the El Faro, which was lost in a hurricane off the coast of Cuba,
Hmm.
down in the Caribbean, and very much in the same way. What tends to happen here is the sinking tends to be very fast and catastrophic, and the crew cannot get to the boats. Plus, being in a small boat in a storm like that is very difficult. Launching a lifeboat in calm weather is not an easy thing to do sometimes, and doing it in extremely rough weather is even worse. And probably the crew was hunkered down in the ship. They were, again, they were getting close to safety in Whitefish Bay. All they had to do is get around the point, and they would have been in calm waters. And so they probably did when it happened. It probably happened very quick, very suddenly, so that the crew could not go. I mean, it is a desperate act to decide to leave a ship to get into a
Yeah.
lifeboat in a storm. It's not something that's done with any sort of, yeah, let's go do this, because you're in a worse situation in many ways.
Oof. And when you were mentioning the story of the 29, just of what they were doing, like that was their job. They were moving this iron ore. Um, and you mentioned in your video you knew one of them, or you said you don't usually do ones you know people?
I've met some of the families. I've
Okay.
been to some events in the past where I've met family members. I didn't know anybody of the crew because it was 75. I was
Yeah,
young. I was
yeah.
really young at the time. But I've met family members at events up and around on the commemoration of it. So it's always hard. And I've seen basically all the family members give their talks. And in truth, even as a mariner, if you don't know somebody, you know exactly who they are, because there are certain types that sail, and that the Great Lakes are really unique because they're their own little area, very unique kind of service, because you shut down in the wintertime when the lakes ice up and the locks shut down. So typically, end of the season, December, January, you shut down the Soo locks. Usually shut down to maybe March, so you get about 4 months off. But during the rest of the season, you're running nonstop. So it's a really laborious, from March to December, January, you're running really crazy. You usually have multiple crews, so you're rotating crews on the ships. It's fast voyages. You can get from Duluth to Cleveland in less than a week, so it's a fast
Mm.
voyage. So you're always churning on the lake, moving cargo as quick as fast as you can. And so it's a very unique environment, and Great Lakes sailors are unique. They will always tell you they're unique because they operate in such a unique environment. To sail on the lakes, you need pilotage for the officers, so you have to know the lakes really, really well. Obviously, you're going through canals, so sulaks, which are huge, are big ones because they can handle ships up to 1,000 feet. It's much bigger.
Mm.
There are ships that can't get out of the Great Lakes. The Welland Canal shuts them onto the four upper lakes. And so you have these 1,000 footers now that run on the lakes. But it's also an older fleet. The newest vessel in the U.S. fleet, the Mark Barker, came on just a few years ago, and that is the first modern Laker built in 40 years.
Where is it out of? They're all out of Lake Superior? They're all Canadian or they're US?
U.S. These are all U.S. built ships. So U.S. has this provision called the Jones Act, which is Section
Mm.
27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1927, which you have to be a U.S. owned, U.S. built, U.S. flagged, U.S. cargo, U.S. Flagged vessel to operate to move cargo between U.S. ports.
Yeah.
Canadian law is different.
I thought that
Canadian
was
law
only in regards to energy, to oil. That's for everything.
No, it's for any cargo
Right? You
or
only hear it usually.
anything you move. So a ship like Edmund Fitzgerald was built in Ohio, for example, and
Mm,
so U.S. owned, U.S. flagged, U.S. crewed, U.S. operated. Canadians are different because Canadians will allow foreign built ships in. So you see a lot of Chinese built and Korean and Japanese built vessels up on the lakes, but they'll operate on the Canadian side. They'll come into U.S. ports because they'll operate between both ports. But inherently within the U.S. trade, you have to fit those parameters.
and last bit on Edmund Fitzgerald, then we'll go back into the Great Lakes of the crew. Like, were these guys educated? Were they making $10,000 a year? Like, what was the kind of life like for them? Was
It
it a
was,
good
I mean,
job?
so I mean, your crew is kind of divided up into three different areas. You have the deck crew, so these are the bridge officers, and then you have the engine crew. These are the ones down in the engine room. And then you have the stewards, the ones who do the cooking, kind of the housekeeping type stuff. So that's your basic arrangement on a ship. Crew of 29. So you probably the majority of them are engineers because engineering takes the most on a ship. You need the most amount of crew on that. You'll have, your captain, your chief mate, second mate, third mate. You'll have some unlicensed personnel on board. They probably all right from the lakes. I mean, all Great Lakes is really unique in that everybody's usually right from that area. Some ways, some of the officers were educated over at Great Lakes Maritime over in Michigan. Others will do what's called come through the hawse pipe. They work as an unlicensed, and you work your way up through the licenses. You
Hmm.
basically get sea time, then you sit for your Coast Guard license, and you go to your next license. And so a lot of these guys have been sailing for a long time, for many years. A couple of new guys on board too. And you always get that mix of the kind of the old grizzled sailors that have been doing it for 20, 30 years. You get your new guys coming on board, earning some money. It's good pay. It's one of the allures of it. It's a really good pay. It's a meritocracy. So do your time, get your license, and you can move up the ranks. And so for a lot of guys, they liked it. They love it. I always love the idea of sailing for a few months and then being off for a few months.
Yeah.
It beats that 9 to 5 weekends. You work hard for a couple of months and then you're off for a couple of months. And so you get to do whatever you want to do. So I
Room
think
and
that's why I became
board.
a college professor afterwards because I get my summers off. I like that deal.
Room and board's covered, or they have like a ship store mentality if you gotta.
No, usually room and board and food is covered for you, but they do have a ship store. So if you want to buy more stuff, and back in the day when they'd pull into Duluth or Toledo or Cleveland, they were in for a while because loading ships was not the vast, especially a bulk carrier. It takes a bit of time to load those vessels, so they were able to get ashore. Obviously, being in the United States, it's nice you don't have issues with visas and passports and things like that, so that you can go ashore and right outside the port in Duluth there were stores and restaurants and bars where you can go to, and they so a lot of local hangouts for these mariners to go into. So it was a very kind of unique little style. The families knew each other, and then your relief crews would come on board, and sometimes it'd be if you were a captain on this ship, you were captain for a set period of time. You may have a relief captain come on
Mm.
board who and so you're kind of swapping off between two people. It creates a very unique environment operating on the ships.
What's the competition between the ocean going cruise and the Great Lakes cruise? Do the ocean guys be like, "Oh, you wimps, you travel in the lakes and you're in a port within a day. Like, come on. We're out there
Everybody,
for
everybody rags everybody in the maritime industry. So it doesn't matter if you're ocean or Great Lakes. It depends what ships you're on. I mean, no one's as good as what you're doing all the time. So
right."
if I'm on a container ship, it's better than the tankers. It's better than the cruise ship guys. They're terrible. And then, you get on the Great Lakes and oh, you guys are puddle jumpers. You guys, run the Great Lakes. It's you're not even out in a real ocean. And in truth, I've sailed up in the Great Lakes. And man, it can be rough. It's a rough type of environment. It's cold. It's brutal when that wind comes in off of the plains of Canada. Holy cow! I don't think I've ever been as cold as in my life as up on Superior. It is a rough, frigid area to be in, and plus you gotta be tough navigating. You gotta go through the locks. It's a grind. Sometimes long voyages are better than short voyages because you get time to kind of kick back and relax. Crossing the Pacific is nice. When you leave Duluth in a day or two, you're at the locks, and then you're
You're
sailing
working again.
between
Yeah.
yeah, and then you're sailing between Detroit, which is always a pain because it's shallow and it's a narrow channel. So you're always fighting things. And the lakes are notoriously dangerous. I mean, more ships sunk in the Great Lakes than the Bermuda Triangle, for example.
Really?
Yep.
Who knew? You knew. That's why we need historians. So let's talk Great Lakes. I'm here in Chicago. Obviously, love our lakes. I've done the Chicago to Mackinac race. I've done Port Huron Mackinac race. I've done some racing out of Bayview in Superior. So have been on the water on all these lakes. You see the ships, but not as much as I would think from watching your channel and learning about how much shipping is actually going on in the Great Lakes, right? So it's rare to be sitting here in Chicago and to see a ship out on the horizon, really. Um, so tell us if you have just generally, or if you have specific stats of like what does the actual today's shipping volume, what are they shipping, where is it going inside the Great Lakes?
So if you
Yeah.
look at the region of the Great Lakes from Duluth, like Montreal, I mean, you're talking about, I think the numbers for 2022 was roughly over 200,000 tons of cargo or moved on the Great Lakes. It's American, Canadian, everybody involved there is moving cargo in and around the Great Lakes. For 2024, just the American ships moved roughly around 78 million tons of cargo around the Great Lakes. The vast majority of that is iron. I mean, over 50% of that is iron ore. Then you get limestone, you get coal, you get cement, you get salt. About a little over 1 million tons of salt are moved around the Great Lakes. So a lot of margaritas obviously being drunk around the Great Lakes at this time. What you don't see moved around the Great Lakes a lot is grain. That's not a big movement around that. But Chicago is key. One of the things I always talk about when I do my maritime history course is Chicago is created as a city because it's the very bottom of Lake Michigan, but it connects to the Illinois River, which connects to the inland waterway system of the Mississippi River. And so when you take Chicago, you take the Illinois River, you connect it to Buffalo with the Erie Canal in 1825. You create a waterway system that literally creates the eastern half of the U.S. into an island. You can sail from
Mm.
Chicago down Illinois, Mississippi, out New Orleans, back up to New York, up the Hudson, across Erie to Buffalo, and then circle around. And that's the great transportation system. It's what opens up the Midwest to the United States because you got the Appalachian Mountains, because it was hard to get up the Mississippi River because of the current. Now all of a sudden you open up that area. And so, yeah, it becomes this massive inland waterway system. I always joke that the War of 1812 was fought so that we can grab the St. Lawrence, so that we can
Mm.
have an inland waterway system that wasn't always dependent on the Mississippi. Unfortunately, we weren't able to liberate the Canadians, so then
Yeah, we tried.
they live in their squalor as Canadians and not as good Americans. I'm just
The
kidding. This is a
and
joke.
what's the largest ship that can make that route? Like what it's that canal you mentioned before. What was it? The Wallaway or something?
Welland Canal keeps
Well,
you locked in, and to go from
where's
Chicago
that?
into the
That's
Mississippi.
Erie into the St. Lawrence?
That's Erie into Ontario and then into
Yeah,
St.
yeah.
Lawrence. So you have a series of locks between. You got to go through the Sioux locks between Superior and Huron, and those are the big locks. Those are the big 1,000 foot long locks. Then you have the locks, the Welland Canal locks that go from Erie into Ontario, and then there's a series of locks, the Eisenhower locks and some Canadian locks that take you down the Seaway. You have to step down from Ontario into the St. Lawrence. When you're on Superior, you're about 600 feet above sea level. And so you've got to step down all the way to get there. Going
Without
into
going
Illinois, it's
over
different.
Niagara. Yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
that's the big step at the Welland Canal. It takes you without going over a barrel in the Niagara Falls. And then to go into the Illinois River, that tends to be tugs and barges. So that's not very large vessels. It tends to be barge traffic that is going through there because above St. Louis, you're in locks, you're in dams and locks. And so what you tend to see here are barge and tugs. So you usually what you'll see limited in those rivers is usually about 15 barges, about 5 wide, 3 long, nested together. And that tends to be about the limit you can get through the lock system north of St. Louis.
I used to have a buddy worked for some company doing barge traffic, and he's like, this is the cheapest transport there is on the
It
barge.
is, and
Yeah.
it
And
is in
I
some
didn't realize
ways.
they're still doing barges in canals. I'm like, wait, what?
Oh yeah, it's massive in many ways. Barges are like they're the antecedents of containers,
Hmm.
and because you use barges for that, the problem you have on the Mississippi River is number one, past 3 years, is we've had massive droughts, and so it creates a lot of problems in using it. So not so much a problem above St. Louis because you have the locks and dams which can control the water. Below the St. Louis, you're at the mercy of the river, and the river can be really a pain. And what happens is when you start hitting low water in the lower Mississippi, you've got to limit the number of barges. When you get down below St. Louis, you can actually have 40 barges on a tow. But you start decreasing that once you start getting low water. Plus, your drafts start changing, so you go from 12-foot draft on barges to 9.5 foot, and that just reduces your capacity. What you tend to see doing on the barges is bulk material. It's grain, it's ore, it's coal. That's what you're moving all the time. They're trying to change that now. One of the big pushes right now is to get the upriver traffic to start bringing containers via the barges up. That's always been a slow
Uh,
transition.
and do they still do the same pellets that were in the Edmund Fitzgerald, or did they figure
They
out a
do,
better
and
way to
there's
do
different
that after
types.
that?
There's different types of ore that they do.
Yeah.
That type of ore was a very heavy type of ore that they were using. So yeah, you get different mixes, and I'm not an expert on all cargo coming out of the Great Lakes right now, but
Yeah.
but they do different levels. So the ships are also designed to carry or a little bit differently now. A lot of the ships are self-loading, self-discharging. So you'll see a lot of the ore carriers now have their own cranes on board. That gets you away from having to use facilities on shore. That's a little bit more effective in cost to do
Hmm.
it because a lot of the problems was a lot of infrastructure costs in the ability to load ore and coal on facilities, and it gives you a little bit more versatility with the ships.
And meanwhile, I think Chicago's planning to take out this whole area and basically that used to be steel plant and turn it into like a quantum mechanics research center or something. So right at the same time, you're losing a lot of the infrastructure, right? They're
Oh
not
yeah, I mean
building more of it.
that's happening everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, where key loading and facilities are for shipping, it's also hot real estate area for developments, whether commercial or residential. And so we see that transitioning everywhere. It's a really tough thing, especially if you look at shipbuilding in the United States. A lot of shipbuilding facilities are right there in urban areas, so the land is worth more for its real
Hmm.
estate value than it is for maybe its shipbuilding value.
Where do they build all the ships these days? Or are we building ships? Like, let's get into that for a second. Like, right, I think
Yeah,
there was some news a little while ago. Most of the shipbuilding is in Asia, I believe.
oh yeah, 94% of all ships are built in three countries, China, Japan, and Korea. And China builds last year 51% of all the
Wow.
world ships. They're on track to build over 60% this year. And that kicked off a big issue by President Trump. We had an executive order come out from him. We had this U.S. Trade Representative Section 301 report come out about port fees for Chinese-owned, Chinese-built ships. We had the introduction of what's called the Ships Act by Senator Mark Kelly, a Democrat from Arizona, and then Senator Todd Young, from Republican from Indiana, pushed this in. So they're trying to rekindle commercial shipbuilding back in the United States. What the U.S. has done largely since the 1980s is outsource our domestic shipbuilding overseas. Literally, the only ships we build in the United States right now are Navy warships. So we've got a series of shipyards that do that. Bath Iron up in Maine, Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut, Newport News in Virginia. You have Pascagoula, which is Huntington Ingalls down in Mississippi, and then you have NASCO in San Diego.
It's a
Then you
good
have
Jimmy
really,
Buffett song, Pascagoula Run. Yeah.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
and because there's a big shipbuilding place down there, and then we have one yard that's doing commercial, and that's really the old Philadelphia Navy Yard, which was bought by Hanwha, which is a Korean shipbuilder. And
Hmm.
so they're doing commercial shipbuilding. They're building 3 container ships right now for Matson Lines that operates between the West Coast and Hawaii and Alaska. But what we're trying to do is kind of restart shipbuilding in the United States. The problem is it's expensive. Anything you stop doing and you try to restart is going to be expensive. And the Chinese, heavily subsidized, give a lot of support to that sector of their industry. And matter of fact, what they're trying to do is run the Japanese and Koreans out of business. So they're
Hmm.
doing everything they can to undercut the big competition out there. And it's one of the reasons why we see Hanwha from Korea, Hyundai from Japan coming over to the United States and trying to start doing shipbuilding in the United States. They see the U.S. market as a viable market.
So if I'm one of those Korean firm building it in the US, that counts under these new laws that it's US built.
Well, it depends on what sector you're building to, and it depends on what percentage of the ship is actually built in the United States.
Mm.
Shipbuilding has changed since that law was passed back in 1920. A lot of things that we do with ships today are shipyards or assembly yards. You bring the components together and you build it together. So your propeller may come from Germany, your engine may come from Italy. And it's really a measure of what percentage of the ship is built in the US to whether or not you can do domestic trade, the coastwise trade. You can be a foreign built ship and be engaged in international trade. There's no problem with that. You can be a Korean built, Japanese built. We even have Chinese built ships that fly the US flag and conduct international trade. You can do that. What they're trying to do is try to get U.S. domestic shipbuilding back up again. The U.S. is very strange in that we have the 23rd largest merchant marine in the world, so we're tiny in terms of overall scale of fleets. However, Americans are the fourth largest investors in shipping. So we're willing to put money into shipping. We just don't put them into American shipping. And that's because
Mm.
we want to see that return on investment. And you get more of a return on investment with foreign shipping than you do with American shipping. And one of the things I testified before Congress the other week was we have to create the environment where Americans want to invest in American shipping. What can we do to promote that shipping environment?
You're just casually dropping that of like when I testified before Congress the other week. Yeah. Oh,
It's the first time I've ever done it, so
how
it's a
was it?
weird thing for me ever to
Nerve-wracking
say.
or weird?
It was nervous. I was very nervous. I got called by Senator Sullivan of Alaska's office, and I thought they were calling me to ask questions for the senator to ask a panel. And then about halfway through the discussion, they said, "Do you want to come testify?" It's like I never testified before. And so I did the testimony, and it was very disconcerting to see senators who you see on TV
Yeah.
right there before when Ted Cruz comes rolling in. It's kind of weird. I'm not gonna
Yeah, I
lie.
bet.
It's a weird feeling when you see him come in. Not
I
that he's
want to
strange. He was great. He was the only guy who got my name right, by the way. Only one who nailed my name perfectly.
I want to ask if they're as dumb as they seem on TV, but we'll leave that for a different podcast.
Their
Um,
staffs are very interesting because they ask a lot of questions. And I will say on the shipping aspect, they're asking a lot of good questions right now. What's really interesting about it was the Senate Commerce Committee. I've watched tons. I'm sure, like you have, Jeff. I've watched tons of testimony with this. It is not like a judiciary or a typical congressional hearing where the Democrats and Republicans are going at each other.
they're
This
going
is
for
the most
sound bites and points.
right.
Yeah.
This was the most bipartisan, and this is a topic that really does draw bipartisanship because I think
Hmm.
they all realize the importance of trade and shipping to the American economy.
Are we, so we're 23rd Maritime. That means just the people in the industry and whatnot.
Number of ships and tonnage in the ship. So
Got it.
that's what we start talking about when we talk about 23rd in the world.
But we're number one in terms of incoming, in terms of stuff coming to us from ships.
Oh yeah, it was definitely the number one importer and trade. So you definitely see that. China is very close, but understand China is a massive importer, largely of raw materials and components for
Soybeans. Hmm.
assembly in China. I did a visit over to Australia to give a talk, and I went to this port in northern Australia called Port Hedland. No one's ever heard of this place. When I was at Port Hedland, it's loaded with ore carriers, kind of like what you see with the Edmund Fitzgerald, but these are ocean-going vessels. There were 2 dozen of these ships in Port Hedland, and they're loading coal, iron, and lithium. And it's like a,
Mm.
a line of ants coming out of Port Hedland in northern Australia, heading to China, Korea, and Japan. I'll give you the number. Last year, they loaded 778 million tons of cargo. 778 million tons. That's 10 times what the US carries on the Great Lakes. 778, that's 5% of global tonnage comes out of that one port.
One harbor,
And,
which I'd
and
never
it
heard of before. Yeah.
right. And
That's crazy.
it's insane because the port is like I was in a tugboat in the middle of the harbor and you see all the boats wrapped around, and it is an insane environment. And they have 40 ships anchored off the dock, off the port, waiting to come in because they don't want every hour, that they're not moving cargo is $5 million, and so they want cargo moving all the time.
I thought China had all the lithium and all that stuff, so they still want some from elsewhere as well.
Oh yeah, and they're
Interesting. Yeah.
importing massive from Australia. Australia is a huge feeder into that system, and that goes to Chinese imports. China is a massive importer of raw materials, oil, natural gas, you name it. I mean, you just see the amount that they import. It's absolutely fascinating. We tend to think China is this massive exporter, but in truth, they import more than they export in terms of tonnage.
You mentioned natural gas, so I'll have to, for all our energy trader listeners, LNG vessels and infrastructure. What's that future look like? Seems like we
Well,
kind of always start and stop and start and stop there.
I mean, since 2016, we've become the largest exporter. I think last month was the biggest month in American exports. Over 100
Mm.
million tons of LNG went out last month. Obviously, the Trump administration's got a favorable environment now, so we're seeing LNG licenses and port construction going on. We're definitely seeing that. There's an effort to try to build liquefied natural gas carriers in the U.S. Hanwha is talking about building one, if not two, liquefied natural gas carriers in it. I'm a big proponent. I think we should be doing everything we can to be reflagging in liquefied natural gas carriers into the U.S. registry, even waiving the build requirement temporarily in the United States to get that LNG so we can move it within the United States, particularly Alaskan LNG coming out of Alaska down to the lower 48,
Mm.
LNG coming from the Gulf Coast up to New England because New York won't allow them to build that pipeline into New England. I think it has to do with the Red Sox. They're starving them of that. Same thing over to Puerto Rico. I think, I'm very
And that's
bullish on
back
it.
to that Jones Act where it has to be a U.S. flag ship to bring that into another U.S. port.
Right. And one of the things I said when I did my testimony, I sat there and said, "Listen, we need to reform it. I'm a staunch Stone X guy. I believe that I don't believe in repealing it. I do believe we need to reform it, and we need to have that discussion." Problem you have in this, Jeff, is there's two camps. There's the anti-Jones Act and there's the pro-Jones Act, and
Yeah.
those two do not get along, and none of them want to take a step down their mountaintop for fear that the other one pounces. I don't care. I'm a tenured professor. I can say whatever the heck I feel like, and
Yeah.
I will tell you that the right decision here is to have a good discussion about reform so that we can do what's best. I think LNG is our big export. It's a massive
Yeah.
export. We've seen it happening, but there are issues with LNG exports in the United States. Last year we had low water in the Panama Canal that disrupted LNG exports to Asia
Mm.
tremendously. It created problems because when the big lane in the Panama Canal, the new lane that opened in 2016, that only handles 10 ships a day. When low water hit the Panama Canal, it went from 10 ships a day down to eight, down to six at some points. And then you had a reduced draft on the vessels. And what Panama did is they started bidding out processes so that you can basically pay millions of dollars to get through the canal. And what we saw was LNG shipments shifted we were fortunate in the US that we could shift our LNG shipments to Europe at the time because natural gas shipments from Russia were down.
And what's it look like to build one of those LNG ships? That's as expensive as it gets?
It is, I wouldn't say it's the most expensive because there are some very elaborate drilling platforms and ships because drilling
Mm.
platforms are ships.
Yeah.
But they are expensive. It's the cooling process. The way we load liquefied natural, the way we liquefy it is cool it. I mean, we just super cool it. And so you've got to put on it used to be pressure. We used to use pressure vessels, which were really dangerous. Now what we do is we super cool it down to, I think it's like 210, 270. I forget what it is below zero.
Ooh.
It's a very expensive process. The plants are really expensive to build. The ship itself isn't that expensive. The hull and the engineering, is
Yeah.
kind of base. It's kind of a big, huge open tanker. It's the LNG tanks you put in them that are the expensive aspect.
Those big balls they look like, right? Looks like a
The
ship
bulls
of
are the
golf balls.
pressure vessels. Most LNG
Oh, the new
carriers you'll
ones.
see today have it almost looks like a shed on top of it. It's kind of a little bit of a sloped, almost like a roof structure, and that's where you do the cooling. And so it's the refrigeration process on board because what you have to do is refrigerate the gas as it comes on board, and then you have to kind of uh, gasify it coming off the vessel. And so they're very expensive. If either you have a facility on shore that do that, or you have a vessel that does it for you. So that's where the ships get really expensive.
And when natural gas is at $4, It starts to not make sense at some point if you have to spend all that money on the. But if we're pulling it out of the ground basically for free, it's where it makes sense. Let's talk the future. So, one, if you have all these ships, they're building. What'd you say? China built 50 some. Um,
Yeah,
are
over
there?
half the world ships.
Oh, 51%. Like how many ships is that? Like hundreds?
Oh, you're building roughly each year, maybe around 1,200 ships. So you're talking about 700 ships a year they're building.
How many are coming offline? Like a couple hundred?
Well, that's one of the big problems we're seeing right now is we're not scrapping or recycling ships the way we
Mm.
should. So what we're seeing is the fleet's aging. We're going from average was about 19 years for a ship, now down to 21. Ship owners buy ships when they have cash in their pocket. That's when you buy ships. So, for example, what we saw happen during the supply chain crisis was container companies, which had cash in their pocket because they made a huge amount of money, invested in buying large container ships. Tanker market, LNG carriers are starting now to buy some money because the tanker market has always been tough. They've I've been hearing for decades now, hey, the tankers are going to rebound, and like tankers don't. LNG a little bit better because of the demand that's out there, so we're seeing LNG carriers being built. But building ships right now are a real big issue because you may have, and your viewers may have seen, the U.S. opposed this new net zero framework over in the International Maritime Organization. This was an effort to reduce carbon emissions on shipping substantially by 2040, with potential to zero out carbon emissions by 2050. That means you've got to build new propulsion plants that are capable of reducing carbon emissions. If you build a ship today in 2025, that ship is going to be good for 15 to 25 years. You're conceivably building a ship that in 2040 has
Will be
got to be
regulated
able
out.
to be
Yeah.
modified to reduce that carbon emission. If you can't reduce that emission, you may have a ship that you have to get rid of early. And what we're seeing right now is people are running ships longer than before because they can, because they don't want to invest in new ships. It's like
Mm.
it's like buying a new
You're,
car today. New car prices are through the roof. So let me run my old car as long as I can. And then everybody doesn't know what the International Maritime Organization is going to do, because if you would have asked me the Monday the vote was going to be held, I would have told you it was going to pass.
mm.
But Trump and the U.S. delegation was able to swing enough votes so that they didn't vote it down, but what they did is they got a 1 year extension. So it's on hold for a year. I don't know where this goes right now.
Well, if I put on my, that's where I was going with that question. So, of like putting on my environmentalist hat on 1,000 new ships a year, like when does it get to be too much? When is they're just overtaking the ocean? And I guess, or if we're saying the oceans are all massively polluted to begin with and it doesn't matter. I was thinking
Well,
about that
I
in the
mean,
Great Lakes too. Like people are going to start, if there's 100 ships a day passing your view in the Great Lakes, people are going to start complaining.
Well, ironically, like on the Great Lakes being a protected sea, a lot of the emission issues don't apply. So you have
Right.
steamships still operating up on the Great Lakes, which can't operate anywhere else. Uh, you're right about, but I would say this that ocean shipping only contributes 3% to global pollution or carbon
Mm,
emissions, I should say.
yeah.
It is a very clean process, and one of the things that we've seen change over the past 30 years
And
is
they're all
how
mostly diesel. Sorry, I interrupted.
largely diesel, and
Yeah.
so you're using diesel propulsion. The problem you have with it is if you go, the amount of carbon per ton, it's very small. It's smaller than aircraft, smaller than trucks, smaller than trains. The problem is it's heavily concentrated because a ship doesn't come in holding a ton, it's hauling
Yeah. Yeah.
200,000 tons. So you get these big kind of carbon plumes because of the ships. And there are ways to mitigate that. You can burn cleaner fuel inside these environmental control areas within territorial waters. You can shift over to shore power. One of the things that everybody talks about is, well, when a ship comes in, we'll have them turn their engines off and we'll plug them into the grid. Well, most grids can't handle getting ships
No.
plugged into them because they are too much of a draw. They try that in Miami with the cruise ships, and the cruise ships draw too much power. It would cause brownouts in Miami. And so what we need is realistic, kind of emission standards. The problem that I have with what the IMO was doing was they were pushing this onto the ship companies and the shipbuilders. It's like, okay, you've got to get greener. You've got to get greener at all expenses. And in truth, this is a national issue. Usually where we saw this innovation come up is with government innovation. It's with, navies and government funding. Now we're doing it through commercial. So much so that what you're going to see is, even if you open up, for example, the Red Sea, the Houthi go away, and now all of a sudden you don't have to send ships around Africa anymore. Well, rates are still going to be kind of artificially high because shipping companies got to invest in these new ship constructions because they got to buy these cleaner ships. Because if they keep burning the old fuel and keep doing the same pollution, they're going to get dinged, especially by the European Union.
And what are there? I've seen those concept drawings of ships that unfurl these huge spinnakers or electric ships. Is any of that realistic?
Yeah, so I mean, you have ships with these big rotor sails, these big kind of look like big towers,
Yeah.
and you put a rotor sail on a bulk carrier or tanker, it gets you a 10% fuel saving. The problem is you can't put enough rotor sails on before it becomes, inefficient. Plus, it takes away tonnage capacity, it's maintenance issues. But we're seeing very, innovative fuels. So, like one of the big fuels that everybody's talking about now is ammonia. We're going to use ammonia for fuel because ammonia doesn't have carbon in it. It's great. You burn ammonia, doesn't create carbon emissions. It's clean. The problem with ammonia is it's ammonia. It's really dangerous. It's really flammable, and it's really corrosive. And I deal with ammonia with people I know who have refrigeration facilities. I'm a volunteer firefighter. I deal with ammonia as a hazardous material. It's really nasty. It's not something you want on a ship.
You want to be
But
stuck on in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with, yeah.
Well, you're not going to be stuck on it because I can tell you right now, if you have an ammonia leak, the way you handle ammonia leak is if you can't seal it, you get off the boat and you leave the boat, and that's what you do, and that's what tends to happen. And I think the problem we have is IMO, International Maritime Organization, the UN shipping arm, has got these great ideas. Everyone loves the idea of being green and efficient. The problem is the practicality of it. What's the practicality of doing this? Plus, if you want to shift over to ammonia fuel, you better have a bunch of ammonia fuel set up around the world, because if I've got a ship that needs ammonia, I need it. Diesel is everywhere. You can find diesel everywhere that you need. Marine diesel is great because it's literally everywhere, and it's a lot cleaner than previous fuel that we've used in the past. Ammonia is tough, especially when you have diversions because of things like the Houthi and geopolitical issues. I set up an ammonia fueling point, and next thing I know, my ship has got to sail away from there because of a geopolitical threat. Now, where do I get the ammonia to fuel it? And how expensive is that ammonia, by the way, versus diesel fuel, which is fairly, affordable?
What about has anyone thought, or use small modular nuclear reactors like the Navy?
That's a big issue for the United States. U.S. has been talking about this. Korea's talking about this. I think small modular nuclear reactors are the way to think about it in the future. It's a lot different than Navy reactors. Navy reactors are very high power. I mean, they get 95% fuel power emissions from their reactors. We're talking maybe about 5%. The key thing in like a molten salt nuclear reactor is, number one, it's extremely safe, especially in a salt water environment. It's extremely safe. The other thing is you got to make it modular so that at the end of the life cycle of the ship, you can pull it out and recycle it. Like if you look at the British Navy has an entire area, a lock, in Scotland, full of every nuclear submarine it's ever had, because it can't recycle the nuclear plant. So they just park their old nuclear submarines up there and can't get rid of them. You've got to create a system where you can recycle it. And I think we can do that. I think one of the things I would propose is, hey, maybe vessel replacement on the Great Lakes is we build a replacement ship and we put modular nuclear reactors in them, and we try that out and we see how that works. The problem with modular nuclear reactors is they're really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
You need really well-trained engineers. You need a batch of engineers to do it, but you will see the cost savings over the life of the vessel. The problem is you don't see that cost savings up front. So you've got to do something to offset the upfront cost of that boat and the crews to operate it. What are we going to do to offset that? We've done this in the past. 1936 Merchant Marine Act, we put what we called national defense features in shipbuilding, where the U.S. would pay some of that money up front to defray that cost, to build that capacity. I think modular nuclear reactors could be the new technology that the U.S. propels itself forward in if it embraces it.
That's my I'm talking up my book because it's my biggest personal holding. All these nuclear uranium stocks and modular reactor stocks because I think it's the only answer to AI data centers and everything. So now you have another use
Yep.
case for me. I love it. And you were talking about Miami, like put one in the port there, like plug into the shore power of the modular reactor right there in the port, right?
Well, not only that, I mean, the ships actually plug into the system and feed power back into the system. That's the
Mm.
other element
Ah,
about it is, back in, God, it was like 1920s, Tacoma, Washington had an earthquake or something like that, and the power went out. The power system in the city was destroyed. They brought a U.S. aircraft carrier, the Lexington, in, plugged it into the power grid, and fed into the power grid. Just
really?
think, if you have modular nuclear ships, they come into port, they plug in, and you use because you can't turn the power plant off. It's always up and running. It's
Yeah.
generating power, but it's generating power that's not used. It can feed
Mm.
back into the system. And now you're generating power back in. You're basically selling power from the ship into the power grid of where you're at. And you're actually easing the power situations in
And
port.
that's how you solve the cost problem. I love it. Get back in there with Congress. We've got a solution. You got anything else you want to tell us? Any good nuggets?
The
I'll
only thing I
ask
would
you.
add is shipping is undergoing this kind of revitalization. People are paying attention to it. It's been really interesting. 4.5 years ago, I started a YouTube channel that was talking about Ever Given stuck in the Suez, and I thought this was going to be a fluke. I'm going to talk about this ship for a couple of weeks, a couple of days, and it's going to go away. And since then, my YouTube channel has just grown. It's just gone up. I'm over 500,000 subscribers,
Woo.
100 million views. It's crazy. It's just, and they're not tuning in to look at this mug, that's for sure. So they're obviously interested in shipping. And, I think it's things like Edmund Fitzgerald, those stories fascinate people. It's something they don't do. And, it involves risk, whether it's your life risk or financial risk, in doing this.
Waiting for your
And
ship
it,
to come in. Yeah.
yeah,
The
I mean,
proverbial.
it's proverbial that, and it really is. It's an amazing thing. We're fascinated by it, and it's an industry that's kind of closed off to us because it's behind a barrier and people don't talk about it. And one of the things that I think I do is kind of be a ship whisperer. I can talk shipping to people, make them understand it. If you talk to people within the shipping industry, they're really tough to talk to because they
Mm.
they they can talk among themselves, but they have a very hard time talking to people outside their industry. And even
Or they're in
shippers.
one lane within the industry. Yeah.
Exactly. If you're tanker guys, you don't talk to the container guys, you don't talk to the bulk guys. It's really, really tough. I like to do that 50,000 foot kind of view and really talk about it. And so I've been very lucky.
You ever mess around with the bulk freight futures?
I haven't done
Yeah.
the futures at all. I've invested in stocks. I've done,
Yeah.
stocks in it. I have not gotten into the futures.
But
So
that's like one of the most volatile things in the
oh
world,
yeah,
right? It's like,
it is for good reason because when you start looking at the bulk futures and even container futures, which another aspect is you can see the volatility. There's so many. Whenever I hear anybody tell me, it's like, hey, we're predicting the end of the quarter to be like this. Like, man, all it takes is one thing, and it throws it off. Now, there's a moment where you can jump on that because usually, if you're fast, you can capitalize on it. But I remember when the Houthis came out, and I sat there and said, "It's like this is going to cause massive disruption," because I knew the insurance was going to go up, and
mm,
insurance is what you have to understand about shipping is everything banks on insurance, and minute insurance goes up, shipping companies understand risk. Risk isn't risking a ship; it's risking profit, and they will shift to what's going to be the most profitable thing for them.
is that still shut down with the Houthis or what's happening there?
Well, the big story right now is the Houthis just announced that they're going to stop attacking ships. The question is, do the shipping companies come back? And I'm in fact, I'm going to work on a video on that that's talks
And do you
specifically
trust
about
them?
that.
Like maybe
But
just
well, yeah, do you
say
trust the
that to draw them
Houthis?
in. Yeah.
Not only do you trust the Houthis, but oh, by the way, we're seeing a resurgence in Somali piracy, and I think they're actually connected. I think it's one and the other is actually connected
Ah.
there. So, do you create this distrust in the area? It's going to be interesting to watch.
Last bit. Favorite shipping tangential movies, right? You mentioned the Somali pirates, the Captain Phillips movie. I'll give you. I'll throw in my Mount Rushmore would be Captain Phillips, Perfect Storm. Not really shipping; they're on a fishing boat, but Master and Commander. I see your tall ship back there. What else you got put on the?
Oh, one of my favorites is a World War II movie with Humphrey Bogart, Action in the North Atlantic. It's the Merchant Marine in World War II. It's like the
Oh,
only Merchant Marine movie
all right.
in
What's it
World War
called? Action
II.
and
Action in the North Atlantic. It is
I'm gonna
a
watch it.
crew on a Liberty ship doing the Murmansk run to
Mm.
Russia. I absolutely love that movie. It's one of my favorites to watch. Master and Commander is great too. I love that movie. There's probably no other one that does shipping better than that. I love the old Gregory Peck Moby Dick talking about whalers. Whalers was a terrible industry. It was a horrible, horrible sector to be in. But you really get the crew on the ship there. Captain Courageous, another old black and white one of the fishing
Mm.
industry out of Gloucester, really shows that types any movie that really shows the crew and what it's like to be at sea. I laugh all the time. Realism in movies isn't really there, but every now and then there'll be little tiny snippets of like, okay, that's exactly
They
true. And
nailed it. Yeah.
in Action in North Atlantic, when the crew is sitting there in the chow hall, just griping and moaning, that's it. That's
That's
as
it.
realistic as you can get. Same thing, Captain Phillips, when they're all in there having coffee and they're griping and moaning. It's like that's
Yeah.
it. You've nailed it. That's the perfect scene. You've captured Merchant Mariners.
It's like the beauty of we're traveling the world, but we're gonna complain about it on our journey. Yeah.
Oh, we're gonna gripe and moan, man. We're gonna bitch and moan about it, guaranteed. If you're a Merchant Mariner and you're not griping and moaning about, you can be the best condition you're in, but man, there's something I can argue about. That's it.
Awesome, Sal. Thanks so much. This has been fun, and we'll put links to the YouTube and everything, and some of these movies. Keep
I
up the
appreciate
good
it,
work.
Jeff.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. It was great to be with you.
you too.
You've been listening to The Derivative. Links from this episode will be in the episode description of this channel. Follow us on Twitter at RCMAlts and visit our website to read our blog or subscribe to our newsletter at rcmalts.com. If you liked our show, introduce a friend and show them how to subscribe. And be sure to leave comments. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinions and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of RCM Alternatives, their affiliates, or companies featured. Due to industry regulations, participants on this podcast are instructed not to make specific trade recommendations nor reference past or potential profits, and listeners are reminded that managed futures, commodity trading, and other alternative investments are complex and carry a risk of substantial losses. As such, they are not suitable for all investors.